I found the email on a Tuesday. Not his phone. Not a receipt. An email forwarded to me by accident from his own account because he'd typed the first 3 letters of my name and his phone auto-filled the wrong address. My work email instead of his assistant's. He'd meant to send it to her. He sent it to me instead. The subject line was, Confirmation, Lakeside Suite, the Remington Hotel, Friday, Sunday. I stared at it for probably 4 minutes before I understood what I was reading. My husband of 11 years, the man I'd helped build a career from a shared 2-bedroom apartment with a coffee table we used as a desk, had booked a suite at the most expensive hotel in the city. Not for us. The reservation was under his name only. Check-in, Friday evening. Check-out, Sunday morning. That Friday was my birthday. I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter. I poured myself a glass of water. I drank it slowly, standing at the sink, looking at the backyard where our dog was sleeping in the sun, completely unbothered by the fact that my marriage was ending in real time. I didn't cry. I remember being surprised by that. I'd been with my husband since I was 26. I was 37 now. We'd met at a firm retreat upstate. I was a 3rd-year associate at Hargrove & Klein. He was there as a consultant the partners had brought in to restructure billing workflows. He had a way of walking into a room like he'd already decided he was the most interesting person in it. And at the time, I found that charming. You do when you're 26. I made partner 4 years ago. That's when things started shifting in ways I couldn't name yet. He'd always had his own consulting practice. Small, steady, comfortable. But when I made partner, suddenly our finances felt like a competition he hadn't agreed to enter. He started taking on bigger clients, working longer hours, traveling more. I was glad for him. I thought it was ambition finally waking up. I didn't recognize it yet as something else. About 8 months before the email, he brought on a new associate to his firm. He mentioned her in passing, young, sharp, just finished her MBA. She reminds me of you, he said, when you were starting out. I didn't think anything of it. I was managing 3 major cases, trying to make it home for dinner twice a week, and genuinely happy that he seemed energized by his work again. I noticed small things. Not the big, obvious things you read about. Small things. He started keeping his phone screen down on the table. He began showering immediately when he got home from the office, before we'd even talked. He stopped asking about my cases, not dramatically, just gradually, the way a radio station loses signal when you drive too far out of range. One day, you realize you've been listening to static for a while. When I asked if something was wrong, he said I was stressed and projecting. I believed him. Or I made myself believe him. Which is a different thing, and I've spent a lot of time understanding that difference. I stood at that kitchen sink for a while, then I picked up my phone, forwarded the email to my personal account, and deleted it from my work inbox. I texted him that I was going to be late, big filing deadline, and not to wait up. Then I drove to my office and I started thinking, I am a partner at a litigation firm. My entire professional life is built on finding the gap between what someone says and what the evidence shows. I am not, by nature, a person who reacts before I understand the full picture. That Tuesday evening, alone in my office with the city going dark outside, I decided I was going to understand the full picture before I did anything at all. I had access to our joint account. Not because I snooped. We'd always been transparent about money, or I'd thought we were. I pulled up the last 6 months of statements on my laptop. I wasn't looking for anything dramatic. I was looking for a pattern. I found 12 hotel charges. Not the Remington, smaller places. Boutique hotels in neighborhoods he'd claimed to have client meetings. Charges on nights he'd said he was at dinners that ran late, or conferences, or just stuck in traffic. I'll be home by 10. I wrote everything down in a yellow legal pad. Dates, amounts, locations. I pulled his calendar. He'd shared it with me years ago for scheduling purposes, and he'd never unshared it, which told me either he was sloppy or he thought I'd stopped looking. Both said something. The associate's name appeared 17 times in 6 months. Early morning coffee meetings, evening strategy sessions, one entry labeled simply, travel. Her first name started with M. I closed the laptop. I looked at the legal pad, then I called my friend Jocelyn. She's a forensic accountant. She's been my closest friend since law school, and she is the most methodical person I have ever met. I told her I needed a favor, not a legal one. A friendly one, she said. How bad? I said, I'm not sure yet. That's what I need to find out. The rest of that week, I went to work normally. I came home normally. I made dinner twice, ordered in once, watched television beside him on the couch like nothing had shifted. He told me he had a client thing Friday through Sunday. Big pitch, couldn't get out of it. He was sorry about my birthday. We'd celebrate the following weekend somewhere special. Anywhere you want, he said. You pick. I said that sounded great. I want to be honest about something. That part was hard. Not the investigation, not the planning. That part I could compartmentalize because I had a task. The sitting next to him on the couch, watching him be completely at ease, watching him lie to my face with the fluency of someone who had been practicing. That part required something from me that I did not know I had. A stillness. A patience. A cold, clear patience that surprised me. I booked my own room at the Remington on Wednesday morning. Not the lakeside suite. I didn't want to be conspicuous. I booked a standard room on the same floor, using my firm's corporate account, under the pretext of a weekend working retreat. The Remington has a relationship with Hargrove & Klein. We've hosted client events there twice a year for a decade. The concierge knew my name. I arranged for Jocelyn to join me Friday evening. I also called a colleague, a senior partner named Owen, who had known both of us socially for years and who, when I explained the situation with appropriate restraint, said, "What do you need from me?" He drove up separately Saturday morning. Friday afternoon, I packed a bag, told my husband I was going to spend my birthday weekend at my sister's because I needed a break from the city, kissed him on the cheek, and drove to the Remington. My room was at the end of the hall. His suite was 4 doors down. Jocelyn arrived at 7. We ordered room service. The good kind, the kind with the silver covers that you feel slightly ridiculous lifting. We opened a bottle of Whispering Angel and we sat on my little balcony and talked for 2 hours about everything except why we were there. At 9:15, we heard the elevator open. I looked at Jocelyn. She looked at me. He came down the hallway. She was with him. She was younger than I'd pictured. Not by much, maybe 31 or 32, wearing a wrap dress and heels, carrying a weekend bag, laughing at something he'd said. He had his hand on the small of her back. My door was closed. They didn't see me. I wasn't standing in the hallway. I'm not going to pretend this was some dramatic confrontation scene, because it wasn't. And that's not what I wanted. What I wanted was confirmation, and I had it now in a way that no one could ever argue with, because Jocelyn was sitting right next to me and she'd seen everything I'd seen. I sat back down. I poured us both more wine. "Happy birthday to me," I said. Jocelyn didn't laugh. She put her hand over mine on the armrest and didn't say anything, which is exactly what I needed from her. I slept better than I expected to, I think because I finally knew. Uncertainty is its own kind of exhaustion. Once you have the truth, even a terrible truth, your body can rest. Owen arrived Saturday morning at 10. We had breakfast in my room, and I walked him through everything I'd compiled, the account statements, the calendar, the email. He looked through it carefully, the way someone does when they're deciding how to respond. Then he set it down on the white hotel comforter and said, "This is going to be complicated." "I know," I said. "Professionally, I mean, not just personally." I'd been thinking about that too. My husband had done consulting work for two of the firm's largest clients over the past 3 years. He'd come in through my relationships, my introductions, my credibility. He'd positioned himself as an extension of the firm's trust network. If this became a public divorce, the kind with lawyers and depositions and financial discovery, there were going to be questions about the consulting fees, the scope of work, the billing. Jocelyn had found something in the personal accounts that I hadn't caught. A series of transfers, modest amounts, from his business account to a joint holding account we'd opened years ago for a vacation property we'd ultimately never bought. The account was still open. He'd been using it. I had joint ownership and had never once looked at it. There was $214,000 in it. It had accumulated over 22 months. I have a very good poker face. I've built it over 15 years of litigation. But sitting in that hotel room on my birthday morning, looking at a number I hadn't expected, I felt something go very, very quiet inside me. Not rage. Quieter than rage. Resolution. Monday morning, I walked into the office before anyone else arrived. I requested a meeting with our managing partner, a woman named Claudia who has known me for 9 years and who has an instinct for seriousness that I have always respected. I told her everything, professionally, clearly, without drama. I brought the legal pad. I brought printed statements. I told her about the client relationships, the potential conflicts, the holding account. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she picked up her coffee cup, held it for a moment and said, "How long have you known?" "About a week," I said. "And you put all of this together in a week?" "It wasn't difficult," I said. "He left a lot of doors unlocked." She nodded slowly. She said the firm would need to conduct its own review of the consulting arrangements. She said it quietly, which meant it was serious. She also said, and I want to be precise about this because it mattered, that my position at the firm was not in question. That was the phrase she used, not in question. I left her office and went to mine and sat for a moment in the chair I'd been sitting in for 4 years as a partner, looking at the framed bar admission certificate on the wall that my mother had given me when I passed, and I thought about how much of my life I had built inside these walls. These relationships, this reputation, this particular kind of quiet authority, and how none of it belonged to him, no matter how many of my introductions he'd used, no matter how many rooms he'd walked into on the strength of my name. I called a divorce attorney that afternoon, not someone from my firm. You don't use your own firm for your own divorce. The conflicts are too messy. I used a woman named Patricia who has a reputation in this city for being extraordinarily thorough and not particularly interested in being liked. She was recommended to me by 3 different people, and the one thing all 3 said was, she doesn't miss anything. She didn't miss anything. The process took 4 months. I'm not going to walk through all of it because some of it is still under seal and some of it is simply mine. The private part, the part that belongs to me and not to any story I'll ever tell. But I'll tell you what's relevant. The holding account was identified as marital assets accumulated through what Patricia's filing characterized as systematic concealment. The consulting arrangements with the firm's clients were reviewed. 2 of them were restructured, and his contracts were terminated without cause. The polite kind of termination, the kind that doesn't trigger litigation, but makes very clear that the relationship is finished. Jocelyn's documentation was submitted as supporting evidence in the financial discovery. Every transfer, every date, every amount. He had a lawyer, of course. His lawyer was good. Not as good as Patricia, but good. There was a mediation session in October that I will remember for the rest of my life. Not because it was dramatic, it wasn't, but because of something he said near the end of it. We were discussing the division of the investment accounts, and he looked across the table at me with an expression I recognized. The particular expression of a person who has just understood that the situation is not what they thought it was. And he said, quietly enough that only I could hear, "When did you know?" I looked at him for a moment. 11 years? The apartment with the coffee table desk, Every dinner party I'd thrown to introduce him to partners, every phone call I'd made on his behalf, every room I'd walked him into and watched him make his pitch with the confidence I'd helped him build. Long enough, I said. I wasn't being cruel. I was being accurate. The settlement was finalized in December. The terms are confidential, which I'll respect here. What I will say is that Patricia was right. She didn't miss anything, and that the holding account was fully addressed in the final agreement, including the question of exactly how $214,000 had moved through a joint account without my knowledge or consent. I want to say something about the associate because people always want to know about the other person, and I understand why. She left his firm 6 weeks after everything became visible. I don't know where she went. I don't know the particulars of that relationship, whether it was real to him, whether she knew all of it, how it ended. Those details don't actually belong to my story. What I know is this. She made choices, and choices have weight, and whatever she's navigating now is between her and her own conscience. I stopped spending energy on her a long time ago. You have a finite amount of energy. I chose to spend mine elsewhere. January of this year, I took on a new client, a company restructuring after a merger, the kind of work that requires 16-hour days and a mind that is completely present. I was grateful for it. I kept the house. Our dog is sleeping in the same patch of sunlight in the backyard, completely unbothered, still the most grounded creature in my daily life. I have dinner with Jocelyn every other Thursday. Owen and I had coffee last week, and he told me about a new client he thought might be a good fit for my practice area. The relationships I built, the ones that were actually mine, they're still here. There's something I've thought about a lot in the months since all of this settled. Everyone who heard the story, everyone I've told some version of it to, asks the same question: how did you not see it? And the answer is harder than it sounds, because it's not about being stupid or blind. I am neither of those things. It happens the way any slow erosion happens, one exception at a time, one explanation at a time, one moment of choosing to believe the simpler story over the more complicated truth because the complicated truth requires you to rebuild everything you thought you understood. You don't miss the signals because you're not paying attention. You miss them because you're paying too much attention to keeping things together to look clearly at what's actually falling apart. I know that now. I knew it in some low, quiet part of me probably earlier than I've admitted. But I know it clearly now, and that clarity is worth something. It cost a great deal, but it's worth something. He had introduced himself in those early years as someone who saw my potential before anyone else did. He said it more than once, in more than one setting. I believed in her before the rest of you caught on. He said it warmly, proudly, in the way of someone taking partial credit for a thing they had witnessed but not built. I used to be touched by that. Now I understand it differently. He saw an infrastructure he could use. He was not wrong that I had potential. But that potential was mine. I built it, I maintained it, I showed up for it every single day before he ever walked into that firm retreat upstate. He didn't see my potential. He saw his own opportunity. The difference matters. My name is on the wall now. Not just in the firm's directory, but on the physical wall outside the conference room they named after the partners who led our pro bono initiative for the last decade. I didn't point that out to anyone. I didn't need to. It's just there, which is how the things that are actually yours tend to be. Last month, one of the junior associates, a young woman who reminds me a little of myself at 28, not in a sentimental way, but in a recognizable one, stopped me after a client meeting to ask how I'd handled a particular negotiation tactic. We ended up talking for 45 minutes. She asked good questions. She took notes in a small leather notebook that she kept very organized. When she left, she said, "Thank you. I feel like I learned more in this conversation than in 6 months of CLE credits." I told her to come back whenever she had questions. I don't tell that story for any grand reason. I tell it because it's the true shape of things. how what you build actually circulates, how influence actually moves through a life when it belongs to you and you choose to put it somewhere real. He built his reputation on a foundation he borrowed from mine. I built mine the way you build anything that lasts, slowly and entirely by hand, and with a very clear idea of what I was making and who it was for. He thought that when he erased my presence from the rooms we'd shared, I would diminish. That I would lose the thread back to myself. He didn't understand, and I think this is the thing I most want to say, the thing that feels truest when I turn it over. He didn't understand that I was never only in those rooms. I was also in the work, in the relationships, in the reputation I'd spent 15 years earning one case at a time. He couldn't erase any of that because none of it had ever required him. I am still here. The audit concluded in February. The firm has moved on. My cases are going well. The dog gets a walk every morning at 6:30, and some mornings the light on the street looks so specific and so calm that I stand there for a minute before we head back inside, just to let it land. I'm 40 now. I feel, strangely and specifically, like myself. I've thought a lot about the word complicit. Not in the legal sense, I know what it means in a courtroom. I mean in the quieter sense, the way you can become complicit in your own erasure simply by being too busy, too trusting, or too committed to the version of your life that you've already built to look clearly at what's actually happening inside it. I was complicit for a while, not because I was foolish. I want to be honest about that because I spent a long time trying to figure out if I was, and I don't think I was. I was complicit because I made a series of small choices to believe the simpler explanation. And those choices accumulated. That's how it works. Not one catastrophic moment of blindness. Hundreds of tiny ones, each reasonable on its own. What I know now, and what took me a long time to really sit with, is that integrity isn't only about what you do when people are watching. It's also about what you do when no one is, including what you do with your own attention. I had stopped paying honest attention, not to my work, not to my friendships, not to the things that were genuinely mine, but to my marriage, to the specific and particular truth of what was actually happening in my own home. I had traded honest attention for comfort, and that trade always costs more than you expect. He made his own choices. I want to be precise about that too. I am not the reason he did what he did. People with real integrity don't look at someone who trusts them and see an opportunity. That's not a failure of circumstance or pressure. That's a failure of character, and it was his to own. But what the whole experience taught me about myself, about the kind of person I want to be going forward, is that intelligence without honesty is just cleverness. And cleverness in service of self-interest, the way he deployed it, eventually hollows out everything around it: the consulting relationships, the reputation, the marriage, the $214,000 sitting in an account he thought I'd never check. All of it was clever, none of it was honest. And in the end, none of it held. Jocelyn showed up on my birthday with a bottle of wine and no questions. Owen drove 2 hours on a Saturday morning because I asked him to. Patricia went through 4 years of financial records with the same focus she'd bring to any case that mattered. Those people, those relationships, held because they were built on something real, on consistent, unglamorous honesty over time. That's the only thing that actually compounds. Not money in a hidden account, not the careful positioning of yourself in rooms you don't belong in. The thing that compounds is who you actually are, day after day, when it would be easier to be something smaller. I'm 40 now. I feel more like myself than I did at 30. That's not an accident. That's what happens when you stop organizing your life around someone else's version of who you should be and start showing up, clearly and completely, as the person you already are. The dog still gets his 6:30 walk. The light is still sometimes extraordinary on that street in the morning. I still take a moment before we head back inside. That part I kept.